Elizabeth of York. Born February 11, 1466, died February 11, 1503, was the Queen of England from her marriage to King Henry VII on January 18, 1486 until her death in 1503. She was the daughter of King Edward IV, and her marriage to Henry VII followed his victory at the Battle of Bosworth Field, which marked the end of the Wars of the Roses. Together, Elizabeth and Henry had 7 children. Elizabeth's younger brothers, the princes in the Tower, mysteriously disappeared from the Tower of London shortly after their uncle, Richard III, seized the throne in 1483. Although the 1484 Act of Parliament Titulus Regius declared the marriage of her parents, Edward IV and Elizabeth Woodville, as invalid, she and her sisters were welcomed back to court by Richard III, and it was rumored that he was plotting to marry her. The final victory of the Lancastrian faction in the Wars of the Roses may have seemed a further disaster for the Yorkist princess. However, Henry Tudor knew the importance of Yorkist support for his invasion and promised to marry Elizabeth before he arrived in England. This may well have contributed to the hemorrhaging of Yorkist support for Richard. Elizabeth seems to have played little part in politics. Her marriage appears to have been a successful and happy one, although her eldest son Arthur, Prince of Wales, died at age 15 in 1502, and 3 other children died young. Her second and only surviving son became King Henry VIII of England, while her daughters Margaret and Mary became queens of Scotland and of France, respectively. Elizabeth of York was born at the Palace of Westminster as the eldest child of King Edward IV and his wife, Elizabeth Woodville. Her christening was celebrated at Westminster Abbey, sponsored by her grandmothers, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, Duchess of Bedford, and Cecily Neville, Duchess of York. Her third sponsor was her cousin, Richard Neville, 16th Earl of Warwick. Elizabeth with her sisters. She is the first from the left. In 1469, aged 3, she was briefly betrothed to George Neville, who was created the Duke of Bedford in anticipation of the marriage. His father, John, later supported George's uncle, the Earl of Warwick, in a rebellion against King Edward IV, and the betrothal was called off. In 1475, Louis XI agreed to the marriage of 9-year-old Elizabeth of York to his son Charles, the Dauphin of France. In 1482, however, Louis XI reneged on his promise. She was named a Lady of the Garter in 1477, at age 11, along with her mother and her paternal aunt Elizabeth of York, Duchess of Suffolk. Though initially slow to keep his promise, Henry VII acknowledged the necessity of marrying Elizabeth of York to ensure the stability of his rule and weaken the claims of other surviving members of the House of York. It seems Henry wished to be seen as ruling in his own right, having claimed the throne by right of conquest and not by his marriage to the de facto heiress of the House of York. He had no intention of sharing power. Henry VII had the Act of Titulus Regius repealed, thereby legitimizing anew the children of Edward IV, and acknowledging Edward V as his predecessor. Though Richard III was regarded as a usurper, his reign was not ignored. Henry and Elizabeth required a papal dispensation to wed because of canon law frowning upon affinity. Henry and Elizabeth were descended from, respectively, John of Gaunt and his younger brother Edmund in the 4th degree, an issue that had caused much dispute and bloodshed as to which claim was superior. 2 applications were sent, the first more locally, and the second one was slow in reaching Rome and slow to return with the response of the Pope. Ultimately, however, the marriage was approved by papal bull of Pope Innocent VIII dated March 1486, 1 month after the wedding, stating that the Pope and his advisers approbeth, confirmeth, and stablisheth the matrimony and conjunction made between our sovereign Lord King Henry VII of the House of Lancaster of that one party and the noble Princess Elizabeth of the House of York. Because the journey to Rome and back took many months, and because Henry as king wanted to be certain that nobody could claim that his wedding to Elizabeth was unlawful or sinful, the more local application was obeyed first. It was sent to the papal legate for England and Scotland, which returned in January 1486. Cardinal Borgia, Archbishop of Canterbury, officiated at the wedding of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York on January 18, 1486. Their first son, Arthur, was born on September 20, 1486, 8 months after their marriage. Elizabeth of York was crowned queen on November 25, 1487. She gave birth to several more children, but only 4 survived infancy: Arthur, Margaret, Henry, and Mary. In 1502, Elizabeth of York became pregnant once more and spent her confinement period in the Tower of London. Her embroiderer Robinette made her a new rich bed with curtains decorated with clouds and roses. On February 2, 1503, she gave birth to a daughter, Catherine, who died a few days later. Succumbing to a postpartum infection, Elizabeth of York died on February 11th, her 37th birthday. Her family seems to have been devastated by her death and mourned her deeply. According to one biographer, the death of Elizabeth broke the heart of her husband and shattered him. Another account says that Henry Tudor privily departed to a solitary place and would no man should resort unto him. This is notable considering that, shortly after Elizabeth's death, records show he became deathly ill himself and would not allow any except his mother Margaret Beaufort near him, including doctors. For Henry Tudor to show his emotions, let alone any sign of infirmity, was highly unusual and alarming to members of his court. Within a little over 2 years, King Henry VII had lost his oldest son, his wife, his baby daughter, and found himself having to honor the Treaty of Perpetual Peace. Thanks for watching HerStory channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe our channel.